Centerville was about the same as DRSM. It just tells me there's nobody in 9B.
Yeah. Other than Avon.
Avon confuses me.
Not good. Easton in motion. He's going to fake the handoff to him this time. Goes back to the other side. He's got Saxon. Breaks one tackle. He cuts to the ice. Stays on his. Not good. Easton in motion. He's going to fake the handoff to him this time. Goes back to the other side. He's got Saxon. Breaks one tackle. He cuts to the ice. Stays on his feet. Touchdown, Tigers! Touchdown, Tigers! Max Saxon with a beautiful run after the catch.
Six. Clock stopped. The play went out of bounds. They'll fake it to Merrill. Lounsbury rolls out. There's Terwilliger. 25 to the 20. Still on his feet. 10, 5. Touchdown. Cooper Terwilliger. Had Marone Cooper, but it's the right one you called earlier. Terwilliger in space. He doesn't look injured at all. I know he's got a shoulder problem, but boy, everything below the shoulders is still working well. And the Governors reclaim the lead on a 30-yard touchdown pass from Caleb Lounsbury to Cooper Terwilliger.
From 57-yard Eagle touchdown.
and welcome to episode number 9 of Inside the 605. We have reached the Ferris Bueller stage. We've done the show 9 times. In episode number 9 here, I'm David Brown. That's Jason Andera, covering everything South Dakota high school football. We are a month away from 7 South Dakota high school state championships.
If you've been on the ride with us on Inside the 605 all season long, it's going to get so much better.
Yes, it
here
will.
in the next month, because now we know these teams. Early in the year, we're trying to figure out what's going on. Now we know them, and now we can break this stuff down and see who can survive and advance. Last week of the regular season for the bottom 4 classes.
Yep, all the 9-mans and 11B. This is the last week of the regular season. Their playoffs start next week. Still a couple more weeks for 11A, AA, and AAA. But we are going to break it all down here on Inside the 605. As a reminder, we are live on YouTube. You can comment at any point. Ask Jandy anything. We will answer questions at the end of the show. During this episode, you're going to go through the matchups within the matchup, because we got a lot of big games, and very exciting, not next week, but when all 7 classes are in the quarterfinals for the playoffs, we're going to have
a pick'em that
Yes.
not only are we going to make our picks like we do every year, we're going to invite you to join us and try to beat us. And so be staying tuned for that. And because now I'm selling sponsorships for this show as well, if you would like to sponsor the picks, just think of the exposure that you're going to get on that. Let me know. Send me an email or DM me, and we'll make it happen.
Chad Berger. We know you got the Taco Johns and the Atomic Wing connections. Come on, give us a little
out.
love for the
Help
viewer
a brother
pick'em.
out.
Help us out. We know you're a great brand ambassador. Why not be an ambassador for our viewer pick'em? And again, that's in 2 weeks when all 7 classes are at the same level. Does not start next week. Starts in 2 weeks. So all 7 classes on the same plane. I think we got it.
We are ready to dive in.
We are. We start, as always, with brownie points. Number 1 this week, Yankton. You kind of called it a couple weeks ago. You thought Yankton was the best team in AA when they were in that 3-4 range. They give Brookings their first loss to an 11 AA school this season, 24-7 the final. Evan Sirk had a touchdown on the opening drive, and most importantly, they forced 4 Brookings turnovers.
Yeah, that to me was the key, was the turnovers. And Brookings has been so good this year, turning other teams over, but when they commit the turnovers, it gets pretty tough. And Yankton has had the defense that has really put them at the number 1 spot in 11 AA, and they showed it last Friday night.
And I think part of the reason Yankton was in that middle of the pack was because, and you can't blame the schedule makers, but they hadn't really played quality competition aside from Watertown. And so when you go down the line, they get this matchup with Brookings in Brookings, and the Bobcats, to this point, we'd known their defense had been great. The offense had been starting to pick it up. Now, not necessarily more questions for Brookings, but more answers for Yankton.
Exactly. I think Brookings still can take care of the ball. They can play with these teams at the top. But isn't that crazy? They moved from 1 to 4.
Yep.
And last week we had Watertown move from 1 to 4. So Yankton, hey, hold on to your spot while you have it at number 1.
And because of this result, we have more 11 AA inception with 7 of the 11 teams. So, to recap, Yankton beat Brookings this past week. Brookings beat T earlier this season. T beat Huron. Huron just beat Aberdeen Central. Aberdeen Central gave Spearfish its only loss. Spearfish beat Watertown, and Watertown beat Yankton. We have completed a circle of 7 teams and the transitive property.
I love it how Huron joins the party.
Yep.
All these teams in 11 AA still dangerous at this point in the season.
And Pierre just beat Sturgis 17-14. Had Sturgis won that game, we would have had 9 teams in that circle.
Exactly. And hey, we still got a couple weeks left for 11 AA action to play out, and we'll talk more about that when we get to them in the Wheel of Justice.
That we will. Second brownie point of the week. How about West Central? Bouncing back, this was a gutty win at Dakota Valley after being shut out by Del Rapids the previous week. They got up early, 14-3, 21-3. Dakota Valley, to their credit, made a comeback. And then West Central, they pull off this trick play late in the game on 4th down. They're up 21-16. Caden Alfson to Carter Gross to Aiden Bartman. It was a double pass for a touchdown. They hold off Dakota Valley in the end, but it showed me something about the character of West Central to bounce back, because losing to Del Rapids after they were on a high from beating Canton, just the pendulum swing going on the road against another ranked opponent. Good on the Trojans.
The Trojans definitely needed to bounce back, and they did, especially the way, not just that they lost to Del Rapids, but the way they lost that game. They needed to build confidence, and they did that. They kept Dakota Valley at arm's length right at the end of the game to hold them off for a top 5 victory.
And they end up flip-flopping in terms of positioning in the 11A rankings. But for West Central, how do they finish the season now? It looks a little more favorable for them down the stretch.
Yeah, they've got a chance to really regroup and get themselves together. They've made it to the Dome the last couple of years, and their sights are set on the Dome again. I know we're talking a lot about those top 3 teams right now in 11A, but they want to regroup and see if they can find their way back to where they've been the last couple of years.
Good road victory for West Central. Final brownie point, and this is a rarity. I'm going to give a brownie point to a team that lost. Woolsey Wessington, 22 points in the fourth quarter to give Parkston a scare. They got it close, couldn't quite pull it off. But they get a brownie point for a couple reasons. One, even though it's a cross-class matchup, this is the best any team has played against Parkston the entire season. And not since the championship against Howard last season had Parkston been tested so much. And B, the Richmonds, they are giving the rest of 9A something to think about down the stretch.
Yeah, not just offensively. Defensively, those two guys are flying around and making plays. The Warbirds, they've got a tough schedule coming here down the stretch. And I think they prove to not only themselves, but to the rest of the class that 9A could be decided by Woolsey Wessington. They're that good of a team. So a marquee loss, you don't hear that very often.
And they had played impressively earlier this season against some other really good teams. I just think when you see the entirety of their work, they're a team that's a threat. They're still hovering in that 4 spot because we talk about those top teams in 9A, mainly Howard and Wall and Warner, but Woolsey Wessington kind of not necessarily sneakily anymore, but they're lurking.
They're lurking, and playoff positioning is going to mean a lot here going down the stretch because nobody wants to play Howard, nobody wants to go out to Wall either, and it's going to be interesting to see kind of where they land and if they make it to the semifinals, how that's going to shake out. It's going to be a lot of fun to see.
All right, so my brownie points, Yankton, West Central, and Woolsey Wessington. From a team perspective, another great week of individual performances. Let's get a look at your top performers.
We got a few new names on the list in 11-man football especially, and we're going to start out with someone special. Special teams special.
Yes.
A punter. Anderson Porish of Huron. 8-yard punt in the game. He had 4 really good punts in the game, averaged over 45 yards per punt. Also made 7 tackles on defense and a pick on defense. Huron getting a nice win over Aberdeen. You mentioned it.
Yep.
And he was a big part of that win.
Absolutely. It was a 10-0 win, so not a lot of offense to show for it. But when you have a game like that, special teams make the difference.
That was a special performance by Anderson Porish. How about Sullivan Schlimgen? He's pretty much used to being on this list every week, but last week against Washington, another 100-yard rushing game. He also passed a touchdown in, and of course 2 rushing touchdowns, and he always has a big game on defense. O'Gorman survives.
Yeah, they survived a furious comeback attempt from Washington, 35-33.
He was definitely the leader on both sides of the ball. How about Cole Snyder of Sioux Falls Christian? He's doing something every week to make big plays. Last week, a kick return touchdown and 2 receiving touchdowns. And once again, Sioux Falls Christian showing they're the best team, and he might be the best player on the best team.
49-8 in a cross-class matchup with Bridgewater Emory Ethan. They were up 27-0 in the first quarter.
I like this one. We had this one sent in, and I didn't see it originally, but Traquan Thomas of Vermilion, a sophomore defensive player, 3 defensive interceptions in a game where they needed field position big time. There was no score in the fourth quarter. A lot of great plays on defense by Traquan Thomas. They barely get the win over Tri-Valley, 15-14.
I was going to say, close game like that, you always can count on the defense, and for a team that plays on the Dakota Dome, teams usually like to play fast and loose on that turf. A lot of big offensive numbers, so nice to see some defense coming through for the Tanagers.
Shout out to Traquan. How about Noah Wald of St. Thomas More? St. Thomas More is quietly on a nice little winning streak here. They could get themselves into position as a top 8 team in 11B, which would give them a home field game in the first round. So Noah Wald coming through big time, 13 of 16, 253 yards and 2 touchdowns in a big win against the state champs from last year, Hot Springs.
Absolutely. You see the numbers there, 253 and a couple touchdowns, 42-0 Cavaliers over Hot Springs.
All right, the 11-man, we had some new names on that list. Let's go to the 9-man game changers. where we have some familiar names. Alec Austin of Centerville put up another, he doesn't look like he's putting up a huge game, but he just continues to pile up completions, pile up yards. He was running the football, two passing touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns for Alec Austin, one of the best quarterbacks in 9A.
Big win over Gayville Vollen, 38-22. As you said, he's been a mainstay on your game changers all season long.
On the other side of that game, Carter Barron, we got to give him a little shout out. They were on the losing end to Centerville, but he came up with an 8-reception, 165-yard receiving and 2 touchdowns, so another good week for Carter Barron. How about Waylon Bowl of Corsica Stickney? Another 200-yard game for Waylon Bowl. This guy, he's going to continue to get better and better. He's going to get some college looks. I think this is the kind of guy who can just play football.
Absolutely. 58-7 Corsica Stickney over Burke. And again, you look at the numbers and the versatility that a guy like Waylon Bowl has.
And then, we're just looking at numbers again as I admire.
Those are pretty good numbers.
Holy smokes. If I didn't give him a game ball back in week 1, he could have had one about 3 times this year. But I'm trying to spread out the game balls a little bit. But look at that. 383 on the ground on 13 carries. 7 touchdowns, David.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Huge win for them, 58-20 as they roll the competition. Iden Myers, another one who's on the list almost every week. Another big game for him over Gregory with the win, and look at him carry the ball for almost 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. That team just dominates on the ground, and they hold the ball almost the whole game with great ball possession.
A big win over Gregory, 34-14. Iden Myers, similarly, a mainstay on this list.
And we got another note. I would love it when you guys send notes, and I don't see the results of all these games, and somebody noticed that Trevin Walker out of New Underwood, the sophomore quarterback, threw for 6 passing touchdowns against Jones County. They got the win 58-30. Congratulations to Trevin Walker. But in the end, the game ball.
Who does it go to?
Goes to Spencer Winchus of Watertown. This guy was all over the field. You see this first carry offensively, 6 rushes, 91 yards, and a touchdown. Not that big of a deal, right? But when the next line of stats come up on defense is where he made his name known. 2 defensive interceptions, returned 1 of them for a touchdown, 7 tackles, was all over the field, 4 of those behind the line of scrimmage, and a pass breakup. He was the difference to me. Watch him just shoot the gap on this one. He makes some plays like this where he's drifting back. He looks almost like Andrew Van Ginkel, just trying to
that's a good comparison.
Find a way to get to the ball on the outside. And this next one looks like Andrew Van Ginkel, too. I think he gets a pick where he drifts back on one and gets the pick 6 like a Van Ginkel. So, yeah, shout out to Spencer Winchus.
25-0 Watertown shuts out T-Area. This is a Watertown team that had fallen in the rankings. Good bounce-back win against a T team that had been rising a little bit in the rankings. Watertown still very much in contention in 11AA, as is essentially half the class in 11AA.
Very much so, and he is, we talked about him as one of the X Factors last week, and this week gets a game ball. He's going to be very pivotal to what Watertown does here in the next couple of weeks.
All right, so Spencer Winchus of the Arrows gets the Game 1 game ball, and we'll be right back after this word from our friends at Game 1. Thanks again to our friends at Game 1 for the sponsorship all season long of the Game Ball. A lot of interesting topics to talk about this week. Once again, it's time for your Real Deal interview with 605 Sports' Ryan Deal.
And Ryan Deal gives us his take on a couple of big games coming up this week, a 9-man game and an 11-man game, and gives us a report on that Parkston-Woolsey-Wessington game that he was at. Let's hear what he has to say. Time to check in with the Real Deal, Ryan Deal, and a lot of stuff going on as we enter the last week of games for 11B through 9-man, and just a couple games left for the big schools. And as always, Ryan, let's start by the game that you went to last week. What were your impressions of Woolsey-Wessington and Parkston, 2 teams came in undefeated, and it ended up being a pretty good game.
Yeah, right away, Parkson came out and took a couple touchdown lead, and you're kind of thinking, well, maybe this won't be the game that we were kind of anticipating. But credit to Wolsey Wessington, they just got a couple good athletes, Caleb and Moshe Richmond brothers, quarterback, wide receiver tandem. With those two guys alone, you just can never count out Wolsey Wessington. So they battled back and I believe got it down within a touchdown. But then Parkson scored one late to kind of seal it and everything. But still a good game. I definitely obviously anticipate both those teams being obviously in the mix in their 9AA and 9A. And it was really cool after the game. Matt Grave, the Parkson coach, 2 or 3 times he was really complimentary of Wolsey Wessington, complimentary of their players and their staff, and kept saying repeatedly that I know they're going to represent our conference well in 9A and everything. So really cool to see an opposing coach really praise and credit Wolsey Wessington. And he's probably happy he doesn't have to face those guys again and everything too. So
exactly. I totally agree with you. Let's talk about one of the strangest classes since, we've covered high school football, 11AA. And this seems to be a topic of conversation every week for me and David, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on just how crazy 11AA has been this year and maybe what you've learned.
I always say in the NFL, I don't think there's any such thing as an upset. I think on any given Sunday, any team can beat any team. And I kind of feel the same way this year with 11AA. Any of those top teams can be in any of those top teams is obviously, but then there's some teams that you just don't really think about, that come up with a nice win here and there. Like, Aberdeen Central beat Spearfish earlier in the season. Spearfish is number 2, and they've obviously kind of risen to the top in that class. So still a lot of unknowns in that class. We talked so many times throughout the year about Pierre and the run that they've been on the last several years. Now they've fallen off, and it's kind of fun to see some parity in that class. And it's really going to be fun once we get down towards the end of the season here with a couple games left in the regular season. And then once we get to the playoffs, who knows how that class is going to shake out. So it's certainly going to be fun to see who comes out of that class and who will face off at the Dakota Dome and everything.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to just seeing how this crazy chapter ends in a couple of weeks. But for now, they're going to definitely keep us guessing. Another couple games to keep us guessing. We've got the top, a couple of top games, and let's start with one in 11 AAA, where all season long we've had a couple teams at the top not play each other, and now we're going to have some really good games in the span of a couple weeks, starting with 1 versus 2 on Friday night.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun one. Harrisburg and Brandon Valley, like you said, those two have obviously kind of separated themselves from the pack in the largest class in the state. And there's obviously some other teams right there, behind those guys. But here we go, number 1 against number 2. So this will be fun to see how it shakes out, and we'll obviously give both those teams a good test to see where they're at late in the season. And probably won't be the only time they play this year. I'm sure a lot of people are hoping that they do get to play again, but this will obviously be one that people that follow the Class 11 AAA will be really keeping an eye on. So that's obviously going to be one to keep an eye on as well and everything.
We've got another battle of undefeateds going on in 9AA as the Elkton Lake Benton Elks take on the Hamlin Chargers. Another one you're looking forward to, right, Ryan?
Absolutely. Whenever you look at the schedules to start the season, this was one when I looked at both Hamlin and Elkton Lake Benton schedules. Last game of the regular season, you probably couldn't have scripted it any better leading into the postseason. Number 2 against number 3. It's got all those kind of storylines. And again, similar to the recent game I just talked about, you hope it's not the only time that they play this year. We'll see how it shakes out with playoffs, but that's going to be a fun one to watch. This athletes on both sides of the ball. So that will really be a one to keep an eye on as well.
We're getting down to it. As always, you keep us well informed on 605sports.com, and it'll be a lot of fun coming down the stretch with you, Ryan, and take care till next week on The Real Deal.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you later, Jason.
That Elkton Hamlin matchup, one of 5 top 5 matchups we have across South Dakota this week. Unreal.
Yeah, there's a few weeks we've had in the last month especially where we've been like, it's hard to find a great matchup. We've got you covered this week. A lot of great matchups. Get outside. It's going to be a little chilly, but get outside and check these games out. They're going to be something.
And because we have good games, I'm excited to spin the Wheel of Justice this week. Where will it land? Let's find out. Ooh, very good. 9AA. This works out nicely. We'll go through the 9-man classes and then go on 11-man. This will be absolutely perfect.
Love it.
So we will start with class 9AA. And we talked about it in the beginning during Brownie Points. Parkston having to fend off Wolsey Wessington in a cross-class matchup. They remain number 1 in the polls, obviously. Hamlin took care of business. Well, they took care of their own business because they were off last week. Elton Lake Benton with a big win over Dubrook in 9A. Viborg Hurley with a win. TDA ACDC also with a victory in 9AA. But further thoughts about Parkston and Wolsey Wessington. We talked about it from the Warbirds' perspective. How about from Parkston's perspective?
I think they're really happy to get a victory against the team the caliber of Wolsey Wessington. And they, kind of like some of these other teams, have had non-competitive games where they've had to try to get better during those non-competitive games. So I think we're at the time of the year where that confidence that they're building up is going to pay off because they're the defending champs, and they're now with a 7-0 start over some good teams. I think it helps them a lot.
Absolutely. And when you look at the rest of what the class did, again, some pretty easy victories for the top 5, but then Hill City bounced back with a big win over Kadoka area. Kimball White Lake, we mentioned the victory over Gregory. So those two teams each receiving an equal amount of votes. So kind of toward that bottom of 9AA could be very interesting.
I think somebody might pop out of that bottom part of 9AA. I think Kimball White Lake is one of those teams that's played really tough schedule and maybe could find their way up. I think Viborg Hurley is a team, if they play well this week, we're going to talk about their game with Howard a little bit more. That's a team that's trending in the right direction. But Hamlin is really good, and Parkston's really good. They're a lot better than I thought at the beginning of the year. And then Elkton, Lake Benton, I think is good, but they just haven't had as many tough games to gauge them with.
Well, that all changes this week. You look at the matchups. We'll start with the other ones in the top 5. Number 1, Parkston, again, versus a 9A school. They're going to be at Gregory. We'll get into the Howard-Viborg Hurley match when we talk in 9A specifically from Howard's perspective. Alcester Hudson, they just knocked off Del Rapids St. Mary's. We'll talk about that in 9B. They are at TDA ACDC this week. And then Wolsey Wessington against Kimball White Lake. So Wolsey Wessington facing another 9AA team.
Yeah, I really like that game. I think we're going to find out a lot about both of those two teams. Kimball White Lake's going to try to just keep it on the ground and control the game. Moshe Richmond and Caleb Richmond are going to try to make those big plays. So if Kimball White Lake can stop them from making the big plays, they'd have a good shot at winning this one. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then you mentioned the TDA ACDC going up against Alcester Hudson. Alcester Hudson with a key victory last week. That really could vault them, and we talked about them as a second-half riser. Well, if they want to be a second-half riser, they're going to have to get a quality win against a ranked team to get on their way into the playoff push.
But, of course, the big matchup in 9AA this week, number 2 Hamlin at number 3 Elkton Lake Benton. And here we will break down the matchup within the matchup with 2 undefeated teams.
Well, I think the big matchup within the matchup is the Elks pass rush. I think Hamlin's been able to throw the ball this year at a pretty good clip. They've thrown for 1,085 yards, or at least Jackson Wadsworth has, and 22 touchdowns, but they haven't seen a pass rush quite like Quentin Wesley and Tayton Bearsma. They're going to have to get pressure on Jackson Wadsworth in order to change the game plan for Hamlin. That's going to be huge. And for Hamlin, I talked to their head coach, and Jeff Sheehan said, we're doing really well in a lot of areas. We could improve a little bit on the run blocking.
Sure.
They haven't had to yet, but they want to get better at all facets so that they are playoff ready. We'll see how they run block against a really good defense like Elkton Lake Benton. I think those two areas are really the matchup within the matchup on this one.
Absolutely. And you look at both teams have capable offensive skill guys on both sides. So Obviously, the Hamlin offensive line has done a good job giving Wadsworth and giving this Hamlin offense time to create plays and make big plays. So if you're Elton Lake Benton, how do you do things from the offensive side from their perspective?
Well, from the offensive side of their perspective, they spread it out. Colt Beck has been an awesome quarterback this year, thrown for 788 yards and 8 touchdowns, but he's also run for 12 touchdowns. Tanner Stein, a threat in the receiving game and in the rushing game. He's run for 10 touchdowns. He's received for over 300 yards. They've got multiple playmakers, and that's something that Hamlin necessarily hasn't seen yet. They've been able to key on one player, and when you have to look at 3, 4, 5 different weapons on offense that Elkton brings, that's going to change the way they play defense a little bit.
It's going to be a fun one. Number 2, Hamlin. Number 3, Elton Lake Benton. Again, both teams 7-0 entering this one. Not the last 7-0 matchup we're going to be talking about here in this one. But for the time being, we'll move on down to 9A. And you mentioned it a little bit earlier with Howard. They get the win over Garrettson easily last week, 54-8. Wall, Warner, easy victories for them. And then Parkston with the tough test against Wolsey Weston. Harding County Bison over Faith, 55-6. So aside from Wolsey Weston and their close loss, each of these top 5 teams had a blowout victory.
Yeah, and, you would like to get tested as you move close toward the playoffs, but if you're not, at least you're getting the blowouts against the team you're supposed to getting a blowout against. Again, we see those top 3 teams that are without a loss, and we see Wolsey, Wessington, Harding County Bison have been in that top 5 almost all season long.
Absolutely. And so when you look at the matchups next week, Lyman is at number 2, Wall. Leola Fredericks at number 3, Warner. Wolsey Wessington, again, playing a 9AA team. As we mentioned, they're going to be at Kimball White Lake, which we mentioned a short time ago. But then the big one, number 1, Howard in 9A, at number 4 in 9AA, Viborg Hurley. Very interesting matchup between a couple of teams that are not necessarily fighting for playoff positioning, but this is going to be a good barometer heading into the postseason.
I think it's going to be a great barometer. And the matchup within the matchup, you look at this Viborg Hurley team, they have the size advantage against Howard, not just because they're 9AA and Howard's 9A. They have some big guys that can move people around. They have matchups on the outside with Nick Hansen and some guys that are just really hard to cover on the outside. But I think Viborg Hurley needs to make big plays in the run game to get their confidence up. They need to find a way to move the ball on the ground. They cannot just rely on those big plays in the passing game if you're going to beat a team like Howard. And for Howard, they need to set the tone early in this one. They've had a couple games where they've gotten out in the first quarter and kind of played to their competition. They're going to have to come out and find a way to show dominance against a bigger team, but I think a more skilled team as far as blocking, tackling, and running goes to Howard, and Tate Miller has been absolutely awesome. He'll be a big part of what they do on Friday night.
And then when you look at the depth of Howard, they've been able to, I should say, not had to, but they've been able to use that depth. When they get up in these big games, the 2s and the 3s have been able to come in. This game, probably going to be mainly the 1s out there.
I totally believe that, but they do have 2s like Weston Remmers who can come in and run almost as well as what Tate Miller has done. And their quarterback, Carson Hinker, can run the football when he needs to. And Luke Kepsel has made a lot of big plays in the passing game when they've needed to. So they've got guys who are kind of beneath the surface who can make big plays for them, but they're going to have to do it for the entire game.
Howard and Viborg Hurley, another great cross-class matchup in the 9-man ranks. Moving on down to 9B. And speaking of cross-class matchups, we're going to get into it in a moment. But with Avon specifically, they win over Scotland Menno 58-20. But the big one we kind of alluded to earlier, Alcester Hudson in 9A over Del Rapids St. Mary 28-22 is the Cardinals' first loss of the season.
Yeah, that bumped them down a little bit in the rankings, and I think they're about at the right spot right now. I think that's a young team that has to figure out how to bounce back after a loss like that. So we'll see if Del Rapids St. Mary's can do that. Faulkton, I think, is in the right spot too. They've had one of the toughest schedules in 9B, suffered a couple losses, but I think they have the character to be that top 2 team that might be able to push Avon a little bit. And then Avon played fairly close with Scotland Menno early in the game, but as has happened most of the season, Avon finds a way to grind on teams and get them really and do whatever they want with them in the second half.
7 touchdowns from Isaiah Myers certainly helps that with 383 on the ground. You mentioned Falkton, them and Sully Buttes, easy victories over Hitchcock, Tulare, and Harriet Selby area, respectively. And then you mentioned tough schedules. Canastoga's had a very difficult schedule. They get a close win, 16-13 over Chester. You know, Chester, a middle of the pack, 9-18. But for Canastoga, once again, adjusting to a new class. They've been up and down throughout the 9-man ranks the past couple of years. They've just had a very interesting schedule, and they're still 5-2.
Yeah, they've had to adjust, like you said, to a new class. They've had to adjust with a new coach. They've had to adjust to a new quarterback in the middle of the season. Let's see if they can put everything together. They might have a little burst left in them in 9B, but it's going to be tough because they have so many new things that they're still trying to work on.
Looking ahead to this Friday, Falkton, they're going to host Northwestern. Del Rapids St. Mary's is at Sioux Falls Lutheran. Sully Buttes is at Sunshine Bible Academy. Canastota, another cross-class matchup. They are at Hanson in 9AA. But speaking of 9AA versus 9B, Freeman Marion Freeman Academy at number 1 Avon, your matchup within this matchup between the Phoenix and the Pirates.
There's a lot of good stuff here. Okay, let's talk about the Phoenix a little bit. They've played an extremely tough schedule. Started out with that game against Parkston, and they've done nothing but improve throughout the season. They have to establish the run. They are a spread offense that loves to throw the ball. They've got the stats to back it up, but when they run, they are a really good team. The athletes on the edge is another thing to watch here. I think last year when these two teams played, it showed that Marion Freeman Academy has enough athletes to get to the outside and make those big plays, something that a lot of teams against Avon hasn't had. So I think they're able to contain Avon a little better than most teams and finishing strong. You've got two contrasting styles here. The Phoenix spread offense. Cheddar has had Riley Cheddar has had an awesome season throwing the football. And then you've got Avon, who does nothing but run the football. It's going to be really interesting to see if they can keep up with them the entire game. I think Freeman can play with them for sure. For half, I can look on the app and I'll see that they might even be in the game in the third quarter. But can they beat them in the fourth quarter? The finishing strong is going to be my tell sign if the Phoenix can play with the Avon Pirates. And I think they might be able to.
And Riley Cheddar might have more pass attempts in the first quarter of this game than Avon will have had the entire season. You're absolutely right when it comes to contrasting styles, but you mentioned him. Nearly 1,800 yards, 17 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, can obviously be a dual threat on the ground too. It's just a matter of which style wins out. So far, it's been so good for Avon, but how do they adjust to a team that's very pass-heavy, pass-oriented?
Well, and they know, and they've a very familiar opponent here in Marion Freeman Academy. Last year, that was the game that Riley Cheddar got hurt, I believe. And this game, it's kind of the game where the Phoenix get everybody back. They have 3 starters coming back who are going to be on the team. That's going to be huge for them. So don't look at the records in this one. Even Justin Lucas, the head coach of Avon, told me, don't look at the records in this one. This is going to be 2 really good teams going at it. And just like that TDA ACDC game that Avon played, where the 2-point conversions were so important, don't be shocked. The team that converts their 2-point conversions might win this game.
And remember, that game versus TDA ACDC was 30-26. It was Avon's closest game of the season. That was against the number 5 team in 9AA. Freedom Marion Freeman Academy, not ranked currently, but still going up those multiple classes. They've been close throughout the year, as you mentioned. So a very intriguing matchup. Really good stuff in 9-man coming up this week. But we move on to the 11-man ranks. We will go back to the top. And 11 AAA, the big boys. And Harrisburg and Jefferson. We didn't really address this earlier on. Harrisburg built a 21-0 lead. Kind of had to fend off Jefferson. They kind of kept them at arm's length the whole time. But nevertheless, Harrisburg's closest game of the season.
Well, a huge play in this game was Sam Knuth hooking up with Jonah Knuth for a touchdown, which really helped them seal the victory in that game. And it was huge because Braden Feldy has been such a focal point. If they show on film that they've got a guy like Jonah Knuth who can make some plays on the outside, it really helps trying to defend this team and makes it harder to defend the Tigers.
And Jefferson has kind of proven all season long that they are the 4th of the top 4, but they've been competitive in these games. They just haven't quite been able to get there.
Yeah, this don't sleep on Jefferson. We get into the semis. That'll be the second time that Vince Benedetto and his coaching staff gets to play these teams, that's when the great coaching comes out. And I'm not just saying this just because I think so. I've heard a lot of other coaches say Vince Benedetto and his staff do an excellent job at game planning for these teams. So don't forget about Jefferson in this one. But, just not quite enough to knock Harrisburg off last week.
Brandon Valley, no issues with Mitchell in the cross-class matchup, 47-0. They held the Colonels to under 100 total yards. Lincoln, no issue with Rapid City Central. O'Gorman and Washington, that was a very interesting game.
Yeah, Washington had a chance at the end with just a couple minutes left on the clock. They went for 2 to try to tie the game. Weren't able to do it, and then O'Gorman ran the clock out. But a furious comeback for Washington shows that they haven't stopped fighting yet.
Absolutely not. Looking at the matchups this week, Lincoln is at Aberdeen Central. That's the cross-class matchup, and that'll be very interesting for the Golden Eagles, especially with all the chaos that's going on in 11AA. Jefferson heads west to take on Rapid City Central. Stevens comes to Sioux Falls to take on O'Gorman. Roosevelt and Washington at Howard Wood Field, but we talked about at the beginning of the season, all these undefeated teams, at some point they were going to have to play each other, and we get probably the most anticipated matchup of the season so far. Harrisburg, Brandon Valley, 1-2 in 11 AAA.
You know, I have to be honest, going into the season, I went back and forth, and the more research I did, I think the more I got lost. But going into the season, I really did think these were the top 2 teams in the class, and they're definitely 2 of the top teams, but the matchup within the matchup is really interesting. We've got great wideouts on both sides with Landon Delaney on Brandon Valley, Braden Feldy on Harrisburg. They get a lot of attention. There's 2 number 1 receivers in this game and a lot of number 3 receivers in this game. How are they going to match up? Justin Cabrera, one of the best corners for Harrisburg. We'll see a lot of we'll see a lot of Landon Delaney, but they're going to need to roll safeties over to help cover him. He is that dominant. And Brandon Valley with one of the best defenses in the entire state. I mean, I know they've got a plan for Braden Feldy, but they've got to watch because Sam Knuth's been running the ball well. Josiah Hines has been running the ball well. But I'll be really interested to see how those wideout matchups kind of evolve throughout the game.
And then you look at fast start. You mentioned Josiah Hines for Harrisburg, but Brandon with Viskerna and Scott, they are able to run effectively. They have good balance on offense, and with the playmakers on both sides, whoever gets out to that quick start might have the edge.
Yeah, I was talking to Lucas Feldkamp, the senior offensive lineman for Brandon Valley, who's headed to Augustana to play offensive line next year, and he said, you know, sometimes we just struggle to get out of the gates. I mean, I think we're going to be motivated, but we just don't fire up until the second half. He said, I think we've scored a touchdown on every first drive of the second half this season, but they need to get out to that tough start. And then I went and talked to the Harrisburg players, and they said the same thing. A big, fast start is so important in this game for Harrisburg as well, because they feel like they've gotten off to some sluggish starts as well. They got off to a good start last week against Jefferson. They're going to need to do the same thing against Brandon Valley this week.
And then with so many amazing skill players on both sides of the ball, limiting the big plays, and that falls all the way back on the quarterbacks. You have the experience with Sam Knuth, but Briggs Knutson has been quietly putting together a very good season for Brandon.
He has. His completion percentage is awesome. He's been playing hurt most of the year and has been really everything and more that they could have wanted in a junior quarterback first-year starter for Brandon Valley. But the big plays, to me, it's almost more important for Harrisburg to limit the big plays because the Brandon Valley defense has showed that they can really take big plays out of teams and force them into a low-scoring, run them up the gut type of game. But Harrisburg's got to be able to answer that on their defensive side as well.
And both these teams, for all the offense that we talked about, they're excellent on defense. I believe Harrisburg's only given up like 7 points a game, and Brandon Valley's about 5 or 6 when you look at the numbers that bear it out. I'm guessing one of these teams will score double digits on Friday.
I can't wait.
At least one.
This is the game I'm going to be out at on Friday night. It's going to be chillier than normal.
Yep.
And I don't know what that means for both teams. I think they can both still throw the ball in the chill, but I just can't wait to see who does make those big plays on defense.
Number 1, Harrisburg. Number 2, Brandon Valley. Going to be an awesome matchup for the second to last week of the regular season. And then the last week of the regular season is going to get even tougher for both these sides as they try and get playoff position. This could determine the 1 or 2 seed.
Yeah, and that was another big theme talking to both these two teams. I asked, how big of a game is this? Because you're probably going to have to see some of these teams again, but they admit, like, this is a playoff all season long to get playoff positioning to make sure they have a home game. I mean, if you lose this game and then next week's no cupcake, you could move down to that number 4 seed pretty quickly if you don't get a win here on Friday night.
Or number 3, in which case you'd have to go on the road for the semifinals.
Exactly.
So absolutely. The 1 and 2 teams in 11 AAA squaring off on Friday. It is going to be fantastic. Moving on down to the funnest conference, easily, or funnest division, I should say, of South Dakota football. Class, sure. Conference class division. You know what we're talking about with 11 AA. We mentioned the inception and how 7 teams with transitive properties can face each other. We mentioned Yankton over Brookings. That was the big result of the week. But then Watertown over T. You mentioned with Spencer Winchester getting your game ball. That was a good bounce back for the Arrows.
Yeah, and that was the least mistakes I've seen Watertown make in a complete game. They really played the complete game from first snap to fourth quarter, and that's a great sign for the Arrows, because if they can do that, they vault back up into one of the elite teams. Well, they're all kind of elite teams, right?
Yep.
But they really vault back to one of those teams that's the scariest to play in the playoffs.
Spearfish, no issues with Douglas doing what good teams do and taking care of a lesser opponent. 58-0 Spearfish over Douglas. Pierre had to fight off Sturgis Brown 17-14. Governors, they've obviously had a season not up to the Pierre standards of the past 7 seasons, but they're still lurking, and you never know when the playoffs hit what these matchups are going to be like.
Great combination last week between Lounsbury and Cooper Terwilliger, the big tight end sophomore for Pierre. He scored 2 touchdowns, and he's had some shoulder issues, but he's playing through those, and it was just great to see him make a couple big plays and lift his team up, and it just shows you, Sturgis all the way up. I mean, we're going to have great games in 11 AA.
And you alluded to it earlier, Huron inviting itself to the party after shutting out Aberdeen Central.
They've had a couple of good weeks in a row now. Colton McNeil has kind of quietly been a really good quarterback for them. And defensively, they've really stepped up the last couple of weeks too. I really opened my eyes and saw Huron in this game, and watch out. They could be a team that defensively especially makes an impact in this playoffs.
Absolutely. We'll get into the big top 5 matchup in just a moment, but the other matchups, Mitchell at Huron, Brookings is at Douglas. So Brookings goes from 1 to 4. They go on the road against Douglas. Number 3, Watertown at Sturgis Brown. We will get to the top 5 matchup in a second, but the one that intrigues me, Spearfish at Pierre. Now, in most years, you would think, okay, Pierre domination. This is number 2 Spearfish at receiving votes Pierre. And it wasn't that long ago, remember that infamous playoff game, 103-0, Pierre over Spearfish. All I can think of is the Paul Rudd meme, look at us. Who would have thought? Not me.
Who would have thought? And if you were an 8th grader back then for Spearfish, and you saw that and you still stayed with football and have gone out.
Yeah.
I mean,
kudos
to you guys, because you're building something new, and you've got guys who are 7th graders and 6th graders who are playing on that varsity team now as well. So, hey, that shows what you can do when you really focus on rebuilding a program, and Spearfish has done that so far.
Absolutely. Spearfish at Pierre, very intriguing matchup Friday, but the big one, top 5, newly minted number 1 Yankton at number 5 T Area. T Area coming off a shutout loss to Watertown. Matchup within the matchup between the Bucks and the Titans.
The quarterback for T Area, Dashiell Lowry, he has got to develop as this season goes on. He was the backup quarterback, but I've seen some signs of development. He was able to throw the ball last week 25 times, 171 yards, but most of that was in the second half during catch-up time. He did make a few mistakes, threw 3 interceptions, but I saw some things that I liked out of him too. If he can continue to develop, it makes them a much tougher team to defend. But the top defense in the league starts with the top linebackers in the class, and that's the Yankton linebackers. Bryce Krall, Matthew Sheldon, 2 of the best linebackers. I hope they're both All-State because they're playing like it right now.
They are. And as you mentioned, with Lowry, very unconventional for T to throw that often with any quarterback. Yeah. And so when you look at that, can they be a little more balanced? Is this something that they're maybe not necessarily trying, but they're trying to shore up before postseason?
Well, looking at their play calling specifically, first down is almost always a run. Second down, 90% of the time is a run, and then they pass if they have to. The second half, after they got down, they decided to throw on first down a few times. Yeah. I really think that helps them out. If they can find a way to mix up their play calling, and if Dashiell Lowry can continue to improve, don't let the 3 interceptions don't let that worry you, Dashel. I think you've got some potential here, but that's going to be a key for me in this game.
And then, of course, Yankton proved last week in the win over Brookings that when they need to, their defense can turn it up and they can run the football.
Oh, yes, they can definitely run the football. They've got speed on the outsides. They've got a little bit of everything. It's, to me, the most complete team right now is Yankton in 11AA.
It's the Bucks and the Titans, number 1 versus number 5 on Friday. Let's head on to 11A. Got to get the wheel right for posterity. Sioux Falls Christian, no issue with Bridgewater, Emory Ethan, 49-8. I mentioned they were up 27-0 in that first quarter. Lennox, that was a pesky Madison team. Madison
2 years in a row.
Madison, not just with the Lennox game, but Madison this season kind of lurking a little bit, still receiving votes.
Really, the only game that Madison has really struggled was obviously the Sioux Falls Christian game.
Yep.
But Lennox, they needed all 3 touchdowns that Boston Cats threw to get that thing done. And last year, remember, that was a loss for Lennox at the end of the year that they wanted to get some revenge, and Madison played them very well.
Absolutely. Del Rapids over Canton, 62-22. You feel for the Seahawks with the injuries, just things have kind of fallen off a little bit for Canton here down the stretch. And then we mentioned West Central and Dakota Valley. They were 5-4. You flip-flop them after the Trojans get the road victory at Dakota Valley. And so you look at this, Sioux Falls Christian continuing to cement itself as the number 1 team, but they're going to have a tough challenge this week.
Yeah, they play a team that hasn't lost since week 1. That's Del Rapids. That's going to be a fantastic look. And a lot of these other matchups that we see in 11A, they're going to have some huge playoff importance. This one could have some huge playoff importance if Del Rapids keeps playing like they have the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, some other matchups on Friday. Tri-Valley, which just lost narrowly to Vermilion. They are at number 2 Lennox. West Central goes to Millbank. Dakota Valley goes to Vermilion. But as we mentioned, the big one, number 1 Sioux Falls Christian, number 3 Del Rapids. Matchup within the matchup, because this is a Del Rapids team that has ended Sioux Falls Christian's playoff runs a couple years in a row.
Well, you don't see this on the matchup within the matchup very much. Try to watch the second level blocking, David.
Getting deep.
But Derek Genslinger, the head coach of Del Rapids, has looked at the tape, and he told me the Sioux Falls Christian linebackers are among the best he's seen in his class, and they have to get in those linebackers down if they want to make a big play or two. Talking to Sioux Falls Christian, one of their best linebackers, Jensen Pixler, we just found out is out, probably for the rest of the season for Sioux Falls Christian. So that makes things interesting as the focus for Del Rapids is to get to that second level and get them down. But the linebacking core is very deep for Sioux Falls Christian, and it starts with one of their best, Canyon Prinz, who has done an excellent job in that second level of the defense this year. So I think the depth for Sioux Falls Christian will really help. They will really miss Jensen Pixler, though, at that defensive linebacker position.
And these are both teams that have been outstanding defenses all season long, but anytime you're missing key personnel, it's going to be on other guys to step up. We know a couple of guys, offensively speaking, who are very good. It's the matchup of the Coles.
The two X Factors going against each other, and you gotta love it. Last week, Cole Snyder went for another kick return touchdown. Cole Rusink has had 3 return touchdowns so far this year. They both are threats in the receiving game. Of course, Cole Snyder, 760 yards receiving and 12 touchdowns. Cole Rusink on the ground, 900 yards and 11 touchdowns. Those two Coles are probably vying for Player of the Year in Class 11A right now, and this game's going to go a long way to decide which of those Coles is going to get that award.
It is number 1 Sioux Falls Christian at 7-0 at number 3 Del Rapids, who is 6-1. Just fantastic matchups once again across all these classes. We will end with 11B, and winner, unfortunately, had a forfeit against them from Lakota Tech. So they got a week off, unfortunately, for the Winter Warriors. Maybe rest some bodies. We know they've had some injuries during the season, so maybe a bit of a good break for them, but I'm sure the kids wanted to play on Friday. Sioux Valley and Elk Point Jefferson both got wins. EPJ, a close one against Flandreau that also challenged Sioux Valley earlier.
Yeah, and Jake Terry, their head coach, said we had 4 touchdowns called back on penalties in that game. Anytime you have 4 touchdowns called back on penalties, it's going to drive the coaching staff crazy, but it also makes the score look a lot closer. But you got to make those plays.
Absolutely. Woonsocket, Wessington Springs, Sanborn Central over Chamberlain, 32-0. Mount Vernon, Plankinton over Miller Highmore Herald, 49-6. And then Clark Willow Lake, who was receiving votes, Mobridge Pollock gets over them 21.
Good win for the Tigers.
Absolutely. Good win for them, 21-20. 2-0. So again, winner, they get a week off. They are at Chamberlain this week. Mount Vernon, Plankinton, and Woonsocket, Western Springs, Sanborn Central. The rest of the top 5, they're all going to play each other. Let's start specifically with this Woonsocket, Western Springs, Sanborn Central, Mount Vernon, Plankinton matchup.
Well, last week, Holden Havlick did not play. And I quickly emailed Michael Schmitz and said, what's going on? Is he hurt? He said, no, we're just being cautious, letting him rest his body, and then he will play this week against Mount Vernon Plankinton. So first of all,
Good
news for the Blackhawks. But they've been throwing the ball at a clip this year with 1,594 yards through the air and 1,250 through the ground. So very balanced team, but a team in 11B that actually throws more than they run. I mean, that's very rare. So Woonsocket, Western Springs, Sanborn Central can definitely get out to a good start if they can get that passing game going in that one. But for MVP, Brent Olson said they need to limit turnovers and penalties in this one. Those are the only things that are really bitten them this year, the Titans, because they played really close games against really good teams in Elk Point, Jefferson, and Winter.
Yep.
But they need a marquee victory against the Blackhawks to really show that they belong amongst this top 3 or 4 teams.
And they've been kind of stuck at that number 5 position seemingly for a month and a half. As you mentioned, they played close games against the Warriors, against the Huskies. They have another opportunity here. And then the big one, Sioux Valley, Elk Point, Jefferson. This is going to be the matchup within the matchup, and it starts with Sioux Valley's big runner.
Well, it starts with Donovan Rose. I think Elk Point Jefferson has about 5 or 6 guys who are really good. But when we're talking about, those best players in the class, only one team has that guy, and it's Sioux Valley, who has Donovan Rose, who's been absolutely electric all season long. And this is a game will definitely be the toughest game of the year for Sioux Valley. So we'll see how he does against really good competition. I know EPJ has their ears up for this one.
And they know from their earlier loss, EPJ does, their earlier loss this season to Winter, what it's going to take to play a top 5 matchup. This is an EPJ team that over the past 3 years has gotten experience at all levels of the postseason. They know they don't want to get that second loss and possibly fall down further in those playoff standings.
Yeah, they feel like when they're at their best, they're right there with a team like Winter. But last week with the mistakes against Flandreau, hopefully they just weren't looking ahead to the Sioux Valley game. But I think they had a really good week of practice this week so far, and will eliminate some of those miscues that really cost them in those last games over the last 2 weeks.
And then, of course, it's all about the battle up front and establishing your dominance in the trenches.
This is going to be a pure 11B grinder between two teams that love to push people out of the way. Elk Point Jefferson has some big bodies. Sioux Valley has some big, strong boys as well. I think it's going to be fun in this one. I also got to mention Keaton Gale. He's done a great job in these past few weeks as the quarterback for EPJ, and he's been running the ball a little bit more effectively. So it gives them another option in the backfield to run the football, not just Gunnar Ewing, but Keaton Gale has been running the ball well too. So that could be a real difference maker.
All 4 11-man classes have top 5 matchups this week. How awesome is that?
I love it. And I want to get back to MVP a little bit. Their quarterback, Isaiah Olson, is going against Holden Havlick. And Havlick's got all the stats. He's got a lot of wins this year. But Isaiah Olson has done a really good job throwing the ball as well. Don't be surprised if MVP throws a few passes down the field and makes something happen there. And then in that Sioux Valley game, I also visited with Dan Hughes this week of Sioux Valley. And it was interesting. He threw in the fact that this year they're doing more mental performance coaching. And not only have the players benefited from that, he thinks the staff has benefited from that as much. So just an interesting little tidbit from Sioux Valley of all the different things that are going into high school football these days.
Yeah, the Cossacks have been such a perennial playoff contender the past couple of years. Anything they can add to that to kind of get over that hump is beneficial.
And I think that one addition is going to be senior Donovan Rose. I think they've had great players come through there. They've had Bowden Schiller, who was awesome last year. But electric type players who can really change the game on a dime, not very often has Sioux Valley had a player like Donovan Rose. I think they're hoping they can push that and that electricity through this game and then through the playoffs.
We will see what happens when 11B sorts itself out. Mount Vernon, Plankinton, Woonsocket, Wessington Springs, Sanborn Central, Elk Point Jefferson. I know I've made that mistake before. Elk Point Jefferson against Sioux Valley. Lots of great stuff, but now it is time, if the board will stay. We still need those fish weights, Chad. I'm sorry. Get it back. There we go. time to ask Jandy anything. Lots of questions here. We'll start with a football question. Loser, do you think anyone will stop Harrisburg this year? We'll definitely find out on Friday.
We will find out Friday. I mean, if we're asking for predictions here, I'm not going to predict a score. I have no idea what to expect. It really does depend on who comes out quickly. But I will say the team that loses this game is not out of it.
No,
so if
by
Harrisburg
no stretch
loses this game, it's just chalk one up to experience. But they could come back in a couple of weeks and meet the same team and take this win. So can anybody beat Harrisburg? Yeah, I think somebody can beat Harrisburg. They've played a couple close games this year. But will it be on Friday night? Who knows?
Chad, our good friend Mr. Berger, because the weather is finally cooling off, what's the coldest game you can ever remember? I have an answer. I'll wait.
You go first, because
Okay.
I have a vivid memory.
Okay, I moved to Sioux Falls in 2008 when I got a job at Kello, and one of the first playoff games I remember doing, I don't remember the teams. I think it was in winter, the semifinals. It had snowed like 6 inches. I was so cold. I was a newbie reporter. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But it was a semifinal, I believe, in winter in November 2008. But I just remember snow and having to drive there, and it was not fun to get there, but it was fun to experience.
I don't remember the year, but it could have been that same year. And it was the championship game in 11 AA at the time. Brandon Valley was at home against Sioux Falls Lincoln, and the winner went to the Dome that year. It must have been Lincoln won the game.
Yeah,
I think.
well, Lincoln won it in 08, so yeah.
So that was 08, okay. Yeah. But Austin Sumner was trying to throw the ball through that chill, and he was still throwing darts like 25-yard outs, and I couldn't move my hands from
that was probably the same day that I was at my thing.
That was. So the funny part was I went to go warm my hand up. I had the camera with the little handle on it. They had like heaters on the side. I went to warm up my hand, and I melted the strap off of my camera. So that was a tough one to explain to Daryl Nelson as I brought it back to KSFY back in the day. But yeah, the rest of the camera was fine, but I did bust a camera because I couldn't feel my fingers.
Oh man.
That probably was the same week.
Those were the days. Let's see. Chad also wants to know how many quarter zips you own. You're the king of the quarter zips apparently. You're like the Manning cast.
I mean,
I would like something from 605 or Live Ticket TV.
Live Ticket TV.
I'm just letting you know. I would like some free merch, please.
I think you're on the list, David. But yeah, this is brand new. I take it out. I get to show off the brand a little bit. So, how many quarter zips? I probably have 20 Midco Sports quarter zips that I don't wear anymore.
You don't wear. Yeah, I probably have a lot of the same. I need to get that like stitch threader to like kind of remove the other stuff because they're still wearable.
I think we need patches. We just need patches. We can just put the 605 over it.
To be completely fair, I still freelance for Midco Sports as
do
you,
too.
so it's fine. So there's actually a reason for us to keep our gear. Jen Bennings, absolutely right. 11 AA is wild. Who do you think is going to end up on top in the end in 11 AA? Boy, ask us this question every week, and we might have a different answer.
Okay, I've said pretty confidently that I think Yankton's the most balanced team over the last couple of weeks now. I've kind of noticed that. But who's going to end up winning this thing? I'm going to regret this, but I think Watertown is.
I was going to say Watertown.
I think Watertown is, because if they play at their best, which they did, didn't even play their best and beat Yankton earlier in the season, but their best is better, I think, than everybody else in the class. But Yankton's the most complete team. We'll see if they even match up. They might have to match up in the semifinals or before. Who knows? It's
as you've mentioned, the Watertown story the whole season long is if they don't shoot themselves in the foot, they usually win. Whether it's penalties or turnovers, if they can put a complete game together, I would say now, 1 month out, I would say Watertown. But again, our opinions might change next week.
Oh yeah, they definitely. Good thing we're not recording this.
Yes.
But I'll go on record. I'm going to go way out there and go a year ahead. I'm going to say next year, the Spearfish Spartans bring one home for the West River. I think it's next year, though.
Next year. Okay. So November 2025, we're going to have to go back to this.
It's pretty early.
All right. Still, I like that. Let's see. Chad, pumpkin spice, yay or nay? Nay.
I'm a nay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Pumpkin pie.
Pumpkin pie, yeah, but pumpkin spice everything, no. Yeah. Absolutely not. Sierra Libis is Isaiah Meyer. What's his college prospects?
Well, the last I heard is I know that there are D2 schools hungry to sign this guy, local D2 schools that are hungry to sign Isaiah Meyer, but he has been getting some interest. The last I heard, even schools like Washington State have reached out. No offers there, but there are schools across the nation that are dabbing their foot in the Isaiah Meyer because he can run, he can bust through, and he's got some potential to get bigger and stronger too. So in the end, I do think he'd be a great Division II running back. I think he would be excellent at a USF or a Northern.
Absolutely. He's he'll have his share of options to choose from, whether it's D2, D1, etc. How much does it stink that the final weekend of the regular season is on a Thursday? For us, it especially stinks because that's the Vikings Thursday night football game against the LA Rams. So
if we did this,
that's my number one reason for it stinking this year.
We record this in my basement. If we recorded in my garage, you'd see my array of Vikings uniforms out there. I am a huge Vikings fan, and I'm trying to decide what to do because next Friday I'm going to go to Lincoln, Nebraska to watch Bergen Riley take on Reagan Riley.
Good volleyball.
But Thursday, I was like, oh, it's perfect because I can do that Friday and then football on Thursday. And then I saw that the Vikings played as well. So what do I do? Do I record the Vikings and go out to a high school game, or do I just watch all 5 screens at the same time? I don't know what to do.
Probably go to a high school game and have the Vikings game on your phone. It's a Prime game, so if you have the Prime app,
that's not the issue, but do I want to record it and watch it? I will watch every play.
Yeah.
That's probably what I'll do.
All right.
We'll see what the weather's like next Thursday.
Let's see. We'll do a couple more. Late one here from Cole Sandland. Underdog. Who's an underdog in 11B?
An underdog, and you know what? I think Mobridge Pollock is a team that's not been in the top 5. I liked Clark Willow Lake a lot, but watching Mobridge Pollock play against them and then Max Saxon run on our top plays almost every week, he's finding his way in there. Now, how much of an underdog? I don't know. They'll definitely be an underdog. I don't know if they're gonna beat any favorites, but they're definitely an underdog to watch.
I don't know if you can count them as an underdog, but I think Woonsocket Weston and Spring Sanborn Central, I think they just have the capability on offense, especially to upset some teams in 11B if possible.
I hope they can continue to throw the ball like they do, and I hope we can see Ryder Mahalik continue to catch balls like he does. He's so good in the receiving game.
All right. We'll end with Matt Kearney. Any big upset predictions? I think he's alluding to this week, but any upset predictions for this week?
For this week, that's a great one. I
guess, what do you consider an upset? Like if Brandon beats Harrisburg 2-1, that's not an upset.
Especially at home, that's not an upset. I think I'm going to go with, and I hate to do this to Avon, but 9B is a different animal than 9AA, and I think Marion Freeman Academy not getting votes in 9AA. But they're healthy. They're as healthy as they've been all season long. Riley Cheddar can throw. If they can play physically with Avon, if they can withstand that physical play, and they have a leader or close in the fourth quarter, they could pull off the big upset.
I will say there's going to be no big upsets this weekend, at least none that are going to catch our eyes. But if there was one, I think that one, just because Avon, or TDA ACDC rather, played Avon so close earlier this season.
And I'm not sure, just because I haven't seen Viborg Hurley in a while, but I think if they could maybe give Howard a game as well. Sure. I don't think they'll win, though.
All right, and I lied. Very last one from Ryan Deal. Favorite thing about covering a game at the Dakota Dome? I will answer for both of us. It's indoors. When it's cold outside, that is the best part.
That's really good. There used to be a tradition with me and my brother. So Bruce, who's producing the show right now, usually goes
Bruce
with
off
me
to the side.
Goes with me to the Dome every year, and for years and years they would serve red drink and
hot dogs and red drink.
Dog.
Yep.
And that used to be our favorite thing, but they don't do it anymore. So now my favorite thing is just catching up with fans from across the state, and then the people who cover this sport too. I love just sitting around chatting with writers and photographers from around the state.
Absolutely. Hey, Dakota Dome, bring back the red drink, bring back the hot dogs. That is a South Dakota tradition, unlike any other, to quote the Masters and our good buddy Jim Nance. Thank you to Bruce Andera for producing. For Jason Andera, I'm David Brown. The playoffs, they start next week.
You can smell them.
You can smell them. Can you smell what South Dakota high school football is cooking? We can, and we'll break it all down next week on Inside the 605. Have a good night, everyone.